Well, one thing it opened up, for one, let me just tell you about that meeting I
Yeah.
went to that I called a interview. For one, they hired me and it went
Nice.
disastrous. It went completely disastrous. They did not pay me. My mentor was like, what did you expect? You presented yourself as someone they could take advantage of. You kept referring to yourself as an employee. You had to get out of that mindset of, and that language of, I'm here to work for you. I'm a subordinate, to we're equals. And I'm here to give you a valued service and you're here to pay me for it.
You know your business can change people's lives, but you don't yet have the right words to inspire them to take action. Imagine the changes you will create in your business as you tap into the secrets of ethical influence and positive persuasion to not only better serve your clients, but also to supercharge your financial freedom. I'm your host, Jason Linett, and welcome to the Hypnotic Language Hacks podcast. I help entrepreneurs and business owners just like you to close more premium sales. And no, this isn't about tricking or manipulating people, not at all. It's about helping your prospects to appropriately sell themselves into your products or services. Please hit subscribe and get all the episodes now at jasonlinett.com. The way you are one place is often the way you are everywhere else. I'm Jason Linett, and welcome to this week's episode of Hypnotic Language Hacks, where in addition to sharing with you specific linguistic methods for ethical influence and positive persuasion, I also invite people onto the program who have rather interesting stories that meet a very specific criteria, where there is a singular turning point, where by doing so, a belief structure completely changed, and as a result, created massive outcomes in their business, in their personal life, and any kind of success it is that we could measure. And that's where this week's guest, Christina Rivera, tells a story from freedom to fear, and how so much of her story really begins to illustrate this premise, that as soon as we create one breakthrough in our life, it very often creates other breakthroughs in other parts of life as well, which as you hear her story in our conversation, we're going to talk about the moment of basically discovering, to say it politely, whether you call it that she was getting fired or laid off, very soon she was going to be out of a job. In a similar time frame, how so much of her personal language was racked with fear and anxiety and negative-based language to then suddenly make a decision, to make that declaration to go after a turning point, and rather than hope it's going to happen, rather than wait and pray that things will be better, to instead take action and do something about it, and the results now speak for themselves. So in this conversation, we're going to talk about what it takes to overcome a fear. And I'll tell you, this is something that I've seen time and time again, working with people, whether it's in my accelerator program, the students inside of Business Influence Systems, or even back in the day, working with clients one-to-one at Virginia Hypnosis as a hypnotist, that as soon as this person, here's the story. They would come in sometimes, and let's say it politely, they had a list. I have a fear of flying. I bite my nails. I want to lose about 15 pounds. I'm afraid of public speaking. Help. And when it was that big of a list, it was kind of hard to go, oh, there's a logical through line of everything, right? You know, if I had a person who was generally stressed, but felt more stressed around that family member or coworker, we could kind of generalize the two together, right? But when they had that laundry list of everything, it was a bit too much to jump into. But here's the discovery, and I gave this a made-up name. I called it residual trance effects. What would very often happen is I would ask that person, of that entire list, which would be the most important to resolve today? Which one, to have that in order, would create the biggest breakthroughs elsewhere in life? And they would tell me, and it wasn't always the same answer. We would go in, we would address that one thing, and then later on I'd follow up. Hey, you mentioned nail biting. How's that going? And they'd respond, oh, that. Yeah, I kind of stopped that on my own. Here's the reality. When we start to overcome a fear, it creates this breakthrough moment in your life where suddenly now you become, as I call it, that person of action. To look at, here's this thing that I want to do, and suddenly we break it down into the nuts and bolts. Well, I have to do X, I have to do Y, and that will help me to Z. The same way that it's a beautiful through line in my conversation here with Christina, where she talks about overcoming a fear of flying. and how so much of that directly related over to asking a client for the value that she was worth, to work with them, to be able to express in a conversation that, no, this wasn't an interview. This was actually a meeting in which now you're seeing the value of what I do and paying me for that service. And we even jump into the dialogue around how so much of finance really at the end of the day can be a bit of an emotional roller coaster. This place where, what was it? Our kids are going through right now in our homeschooling. As we're homeschooling this year, what are those topics that we all go, you know what, I wish I learned this in school? Well, as now we're the school, as my wife called it, Winging It Academy, pictures of birds, but also think it through. We are kind of winging it, but then again, making use of accepted protocols, accepted, sort of language plans and syllabuses and so forth. Still kind of winging it as we go. Well, we added in 2 features to our homeschool. One, we added in cooking, because everyone should know how to cook, right? It's a necessary life skill that absolutely must be there. Also, we've added in finance. Why? So the kids are now learning at 7 and 9 years old how to know how much money they have, to know what they might possibly owe. We created a little bit of a system around our house, but also the importance of saving and investing and even donating. So looking at how there's a real implication of something. So now the conflicts that some parents would face with their kids, that the kid wants to buy this thing. Well, Max, do you have enough money for that? No. Well, this is your weekly allowance when you take care of these chores. Let's look this up together. How many weeks would it take you to have enough money for that? And of course, by the time we get to that, 7-year-old, he's lost the interest in it and we've moved on and didn't waste the money on the thing he didn't want in the first place. Go parenting. So how so much of what we get into comes from a place of fear. Now, the exception to that is when we have some frameworks that help us to boost that confidence and overwrite that fear structure. This is why inside of Business Influence Systems, I teach how to deliver a message on video in a way that inspires people to take action. Well, I have found that as people had a fear of going on camera, as soon as they felt confidence in what they were delivering, they resolved the fear on their own. People had the fear of, what if I write something on a website and people don't like it? Well, again, when you've got my long form writing strategy, you easily overwrite the structure of that fear because now you're writing with purpose. Now you're conveying the value of what you do. And now you're projecting that confidence in such a way that people are excited to take action with you. So do you see how this conversation you're about to listen to with Christina is one where we talk in detail about how she overcame a fear, how in some way her story has inspired many others to let go of their fears as well, and how that directly relates over to finance. A little bit more of Christina before we jump into the conversation here, which, by the way, this is episode number 18. You can find links to the show notes and the descriptions, the video of this conversation, plus the links to check out everything that Christina offers by going to jasonlinett.com. My last name is spelled with just 6 letters, Linett. 1 N, 2 T's, no extra letters at the end. Throw the number 18 after a / jasonlinett.com /18. That'll bring you to the show notes. Here is more about Christina. Earlier in 2020, she published her first book, Having It Made, a journey of rediscovery and purpose. Some of the stories from that book you're going to hear in this conversation. And she comes from a background in corporate finance and has more than 25 years of experience in the field of corporate finance and accounts receivable. Since the conception of her show, Savvy Business, which launched back in 2012, she has interviewed over 1,000 business owners, foremost experts and successful individuals from all walks of life. This is a great conversation of overcoming our own personal baggage to create even greater value for the people whose lives we serve with our products and our services. So with that, here we go. This is Christina Rivera on Hypnotic Language Hacks. Before we get started today, if you want to easily grab people's attention, naturally build authority, and organically have your prospects wanting more from you, even before you've made an offer, I've created a step-by-step program to help you to do just that. It's called Business Influence Systems. And this is your opportunity now to visit jasonlinett.com to get a free behind-the-scenes tour of the exact hypnotic persuasion strategies that you can ethically use to better start up or scale up your business. If you want a proven framework to boost your confidence, attract premium clients, and inspire more people to take action with you, get Business Influence Systems now at jasonlinett.com. Hey, it's Jason Linett, and I am here with Christina Rivera. Christina, how are you?
I'm doing fabulous. Thank you, Jason, for having me out here today.
Absolutely. And for those that are new to you, could you briefly introduce yourself and tell us a bit about what you do?
Great. That's exactly what I do on my show. Yeah. Yeah. I'm Christina Rivera. I've been doing a podcast myself for the past almost 9 years, coming up this April. It's Savvy Business. And what I started to do, I was telling you before the interview, Jason, that I was on a path many years ago where I was just filled with all of my thoughts, words, and actions were all filled with fear. And in 2006, I made a decision that I'm going to do something different. And it started with one action, then moved into several other opportunities and windows and doors opened. And that led me to starting a business, a podcast, and all this wonderful stuff to where we are today.
Yeah, and I love the idea that the way you are one place is often the way you are somewhere else. So take us back in time. It's 2006, where a lot of what you do nowadays talks about money and finance, yet this wasn't necessarily a monetary fear that you had to overcome. What was that fear?
Yeah, it was funny. It was about everything having to do with life, about living life. There was nothing I didn't do, and I didn't even realize it. It was a good friend of mine that said, you know what? Every time you talk to me about whatever it is, whether it's starting a new job or going to meet a new guy for a date or whatever it might be, there was always couched in it language, and your thoughts and your actions were all strewed around, I'm scared, I'm fearful, I'm anxious. And they said, do you realize that that's so much part of your life? And I said, no, I didn't realize it. And then I started to pay attention. You know, when someone opens up and tells you something, you start to notice it. It's like all of a sudden you buy a smart car. There are smart cars everywhere. Well, now I'm noticing that I'm using fear-based language everywhere, no matter what it is. Oh, I'm scared to get that chili. It might be hot. I'm like, gee, there I go again. But then I started to look at my life. What was I not happy with, or what might be causing my fear-based language? And I found that I would probably say at the time I was happy, but I was more content, and I was just living a life of what you might call safety.
Yeah.
Doing not necessarily my favorite job or my favorite life, but just I'm comfortable. Somewhat. And then I start to say, okay, what would I do if I were to push myself so I'm not maybe so comfortable, but begin to push past some of these fears? And one of the biggest ones for me at that time was the fear of flying. I would feel when I go fly, and I love to travel, that I would actually burst from fear that was going to kill me. That's how intense the fear was. Oh, wow, so in 2006, intense. I mean, when I would go on a commercial flight, I'd be under the seat practically. I'd be like this. It was horrible. Everyone's looking around. Is there something I should know? But I made a decision in 2006. I was going to first take a flying lesson. And it's amazing. And you know this, Jason, from the work you do, that when you first make a declaration like that and you mean it, then stuff happens. Like the next time I signed into my Yahoo message, I got a big advertisement that said Discovery Flight for $50.
Nice.
A pop-up. And I'm like, out of nowhere. And I'm like, get out. And so I clicked on it, and it was a flight school in Long Island, New York. And I decided to take a Discovery flight. And I was so excited, but petrified at the same time for the next 3 weeks. All I could talk about, I'm going to take a flight lesson. And it was scary as all heck. I mean, I went out there, my brain is screaming, get the heck out of here, run away, don't do it. But you know, like when you're up there at 2,000 or more feet, you can't open up the door and get out. You have to deal with it.
Yeah,
There's nowhere you can go. You can't go anywhere. So I'm there, and I can't run away. And as we continue with the flight, and you realize you can't get away from the fear, you just have to sit with it. And at that moment, when I realized I stopped fighting it because there was nowhere to go, it washed over me and disappeared. And this sense of amazing peace washed over me. It was kind of like I had to realize that I couldn't make it disappear. I just live with it, stand with it. And then it just, and it was amazing. And then I looked at the window and go, oh, this is kind of cool. Look at it. Wow, this is awesome up here. And by the time I landed, please sign me up for flying classes. I was like, I'm hooked.
Wait, tell me if this kind of matches up, because there's some things that working as I started as a hypnotist before I started to teach people in business the specific language patterns and the strategies of ethical influence and positive persuasion. When we're inside of a problem, I mean, it's the horse with the blinders and it's that spotlight shining on one specific thing and there's nothing we can do about it. But as soon as we create that shift, which for yours was the moment of taking action and kind of that, as you said, that declaration, here's what I'm going to do about it. And as soon as we're in it, it's where if we want to use this metaphor of the horse with the blinders and the spotlight, it's that the ugly fluorescents are turning on. And this is an old line out of hypnotic change work. You start to notice everything it is you were not yet noticing. And as you mentioned, that rush of peace to go, tell me if this matches up. This place where, yes, it was peaceful. Yes, it was exhilarating, but there probably was still a dash of, oh, this is it. Oh, I can do this.
Yeah, it was like, oh my God, I was scared of this. Now, not to say that fear completely disappeared, because as I started taking flying lessons and I learned different things, you push yourself. And again, that place of uncomfortableness again puts you into that fear. But because I'd already been there, I realized, okay, all I can do is go through it and it's going to go away. But you just have to keep doing it. And I think my biggest lesson, they asked me to do a talk after a couple of years of flying to a group of women who were flying and had fear of flying. And they said, so what's the magic recipe to getting rid of it? There is none. You just do it anyway. And they're like, wait a second, that's what we paid you for? No, no, don't worry. I'll tell you some stories along the way. But there is really is no magic pill. It's just, and what I ended up, eventually writing about in my book was just really that through that particular moment of first dealing with the fear of flying and then looking at the rest of my life, what am I not doing that could expand my potential that I'm not doing because I'm living in comfortableness and security and now pushing myself past the fear. And then that opened up later on to starting a business, a podcast, and a bunch of other opportunities that wouldn't have happened had I not taken this first step. Yeah,
it's that I've said this for years, that the way you are one place is often the way you are everywhere else. That going back to that specific turning point of going, if I can be the one to make this declaration, book this ticket and decide this is what I'm doing now, it directly relates to, let's say it's another business owner who, host to host, decides to go out and launch a podcast. It becomes a very different conversation when we take it out of that place of, it'd be nice to. Perhaps I should, versus, hey, everybody, on this date, episode 1 is launching. And as I did just to build the motivation for myself, and we're launching with 10 episodes just to go, yep, we're serious about this. Or behind my shoulder, putting out a book in January 2019 and how important it was to me to go, this is the date that it's coming out. That I had a career at one point working in event production. So some of that was the corporate product release. Some of that was the political fundraiser. Which side? Whoever paid us that week. Regional theater. And, the classic quote from Lorne Michaels of Saturday Night Live, whether we're ready or not, the show goes live at 11:30. That's something happens when we make that statement. So let's bring this around to business, because as you said, by overcoming something personal, it kind of freed up all these other things. Let's start with the before. So it's clear what the flying was like before, but in terms of the dialogue, the stories of yourself as a business owner, prior to that, what was it back then?
It's interesting because back in 2006, I would have never, ever, ever considered in a million years to open a business. And an interesting thing happened that year, besides the fear of flying that I started to work through. I then had this job I thought I'd be a lifer at. It was a finance job. I worked in their finance department. And my goal is I'm going to work to VP status. I want to be the top of this business. And I love the company and this is going to be it. Did I love the work within the company? I love finances, but the work within the company, you know how it is in a super huge corporation, it gets very sticky tape, red tape thing. You're not free to really grow the company probably the way you would if it were your own. So I'm there, and then something out of nowhere comes. They have to cut people in every department.
Oh, wow.
And I had just started with the company. They said, oh, it's a great opportunity. We want to get you on board. You're going to grow massively, blah, blah, blah. A year and a half out. And they said, well, I'm sorry, we're going to have to let you go in December, in 2 months. And I was like, you pulled the rug out from under me. I was so bitter. I was so angry. And one of my greatest fears is being without a job, and maybe eventually, you go down this train wreck in your brain, like no job, no food, no shelter. You go straight to I'm going to be homeless and whatever. You go straight to the worst possible scenario. So I was going through that, and I was talking to one of my ex-bosses, and he said to me, "I don't know why you're fretful. I mean, you've had a wonderful career in finance. All the companies you work at will give you tremendous review, even these people. Why don't you just start your own financial firm?" I was like, nah. He's like, yeah, I'll partner with you. So, I started to think about it. And the more I thought about it, I got excited. It's, of course, fearful a little bit because the idea, I've never done this. I know nothing about business. But then I just put together a business plan. I showed it to my ex-boss. He then said, "I'm not really free to partner with you, but I'll give you some tidbits and advice and mentor you." But yeah, just a couple months later, I told the people I was working with that, it's been great. I'm not going to consult with you. I'm actually going to just go full steam ahead on my own business.
Nice.
And I started yeah. And so it was a great run. My first couple clients were people actually I worked with as an employee. And they hired me back a couple of times. So it was it goes to show that I had a pretty good relationship with them as an employee. But then I think what's interesting, Jason, is getting my mindset into the different idea of now I'm not a employee, I'm a business owner.
Yeah.
Because it's a different mindset. Because now anything that happened regarding my work was a personal reflection on me, and not so much, I screwed up. My boss will be better next time. But here, no. This is a reflection of my business and in a sense, myself.
Yeah. So then looking at that situation then, to be there where now it's on you, and how this whole conversation began in terms of looking at a fear and then overcoming it. What are some of those things that had to be overcome and said in terms of launching your business? And even as you've interviewed people along the way, what are some of those common themes that you're finding people are running into in terms of that story that they're telling themselves before they even launch?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing I had to get over was realizing that this is the vision I had in my head as a business owner is one that comes in, does a couple hours, and they have people doing things, and they get to chill on a beach somewhere. Yeah, 20 years from now, maybe, or 10 years, whenever you've built the very strong foundation.
What's the phrase that, and this is a startup thing perhaps, but you're willing to put in 80 hours a week for yourself to not give someone else 40 hours a week.
Yeah. So,
eventually, that stuff becomes automated and maybe even passive, but it has to begin massively active to get up and running in the first place.
Exactly. And that's what I quickly realized. The first week I woke up at 10 a.m., did an hour of meditation and started making phone calls for sales and quickly ran dry because everyone I knew were in corporations I already worked with. And after about 2 weeks of calling everyone I knew or contacts they knew, I either got a few gigs or not. And then now I'm back to, okay, now I got to find new people. Now this is a whole new set of uncomfortableness going to cold call people I don't know. And where do I even begin to find them? One of the first things I did and to get past was realizing now I'm not an employee. I'm a business owner. How does a business owner be in the world? How do you be? What is your sense of being? It isn't that, I'm 8 hours. Okay, let's clock out. Ching. No, it's like, this is a reflection of me. So now I had to realize, how am I going to present myself? Even going for a meeting. The first thing I did is I hired 2 mentors, one that worked in finance and one that's built a 6-figure business for over 12 years at the time and was very successful. So I hired both of them. And the one thing they said to me is that when you go into a meeting like you did this week with one of the potential clients of yours, you said, "Oh, it was a great interview." And we're like, "It's not an interview. I thought you were a business owner. It's a meeting. It's a, nice. A negotiation." So it was just getting the language set. Yeah.
Let's go off of that for a moment because this is, hypnotic language hacks, change your words, change your mind, change your business. How so much of it changes where I'd give a side example of, here's a client of mine that used to talk about the consult. Well, that's where they would ask me questions and see if they wanted to hire me. Like, no, this is a conversation where you're interviewing them. And if we frame it ever so slightly, now the dynamic is, I see a lot of great results with this. It was a fitness program. I see a lot of great results with people. However, it's not clearly a match for everybody because I'm looking for those people who fit X, Y, and Z criteria. The same as hosting another podcast that's gone out for 7 years, I stopped calling them interviews. Congratulations, Christina. You're not in an interview right now. This is a conversation by changing the dynamic, even if it is the big name in a certain field, it's two people having a dialogue and suddenly it gives it a different respect. So by changing it to a conversation, by changing it to a meeting, what did that open up for you?
Well, one thing it opened up, for one, let me just tell you about that meeting I went to that I called a interview. For one, they hired me and it went disastrous. It went completely disastrous. They did not pay me, And my mentor was like, what did you expect? You presented yourself as someone they could take advantage of. You kept referring to yourself as an employee. You had to get out of that mindset of, and that language of, I'm here to work for you. I'm a subordinate, to we're equals. And I'm here to give you a valued service and you're here to pay me for it.
Nice.
And then there was the other thing to work through for myself, which is it's not icky to say, how much money you want, which was another huge hurdle that took probably more than a year for me to work through. Yeah. So, but in this particular case, go.
Oh, yeah. What had to happen then in terms of being able to say the number? I teach that the pricing is directly proportionate to three things: the quality of the thing we're providing, product or service, the confidence of the person asking for the sale, as well as the quality of, let's call it the onboarding experience that then demonstrates points 1 and 2. So if we just sit there and go 15,000, it's like being told a car is $15,000. We don't yet know what it is. So what had to change in terms of your mindset to then present that investment, not price?
Investment, yes. And I didn't use that for almost a year either. It's interesting. My mentor would sit down and actually work out sales conversations on how to have them. But it's one thing working through a script and then another thing owning it. And for me, and I could get the presenting quality, making sure I could really add value when I got there to do the work. I'd been doing that for a long time and I was the best in my field when even I was an employee. But the problem for me was seeing the value in myself, having that value inside to know that, yes, I do present this value and it is okay for me to ask for set amount in value in cash. So that was a work through. But I recall the biggest turning point for me, and I talk about it when I did write in my book, was one night someone had called me for advertising in Savvy. And at that point, I think we'd reached about 70,000 listeners. And people started to tell me, hey, listen, I come on your show. I'm starting to get leads, la, 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 la. And so we started to do advertising. Well, he called me one day, this guy, and he said, I want to come on your show. I want to be an advertiser, but I don't want to pay you because I want to pay you in services. And I said, well, yeah, but I don't really need what you have right now. So here's the cost. And he's like, no, you need to take me on because I'm amazing. And people need to hear about my service. And so he just kept at it and he would not let me off the phone. And I had this thing, and I didn't realize it till this conversation, that I needed people to be okay with me. I needed them to accept me and to have acceptance more than I needed the money, at least. That's what I realized. So I said yes to him, and then I hung up and I felt like crap because at that time I'd now been in business a whole 9 months. I have no food in the refrigerator. I'm not ready. I can't pay my bills, and I'm really hungry. And this was really stupid because now I'm going to do this work. I'm not getting paid. So I spent the next hour crying about it until I realized he didn't do anything wrong. I'm the one that didn't value myself enough to just say, no, this is the cost, period. You can take it or leave it, no biggie. But see, he knew it was a biggie for me. He knew he could move me because of my language, because I did not feel confident in myself. But from that point on, boom, that week, the next 4 people I talked to, we closed the sale, meaning I got them, they were interested, they saw the value, and they heard the value in my language, and they were able to seal the deal with me. And I was able to provide the value. But I had to get past that uncomfortableness that, yes, what I have to give is valuable, and it's okay to ask for that in dollar amount.
I'm going to the horrible metaphor of the ripping off of the Band-Aid. That sometimes we have to go through that really crappy experience to get a rather expensive or painful learning lesson. For part of my audience here that listens to the Work Smart Hypnosis podcast, which that's for people in the hypnotic industry who want to do hypnosis better. This is more business owners, entrepreneurs, online marketers who want to learn hypnotic techniques. But that other program, the origin story of that was to go, let me capture the conversations that I genuinely want to have. And there just happens to be an audience, was the premise. And there's a moment where halfway through a recording, this will sound familiar, halfway through a recording, I'm going, this is not what this show is. Yet I was being nice and keeping up the friendly professional banter. And then step one, almost deleted the episode. Oh, rats, wouldn't you believe it? The recording failed. But as I listened to it, and just to set the stage, they were not doing what you're doing wonderfully. Yes, you have a book. Yes, you have a service. Yet you are providing real value to all of us here right now. We're learning from you. We're building rapport with you. Nicely done. This person was just selling a thing. And I published it as a punishment to myself. And the same story. I hated myself for a week to the point I think I took a month or so off that program, which it was batch produced, and no one can go back and guess which one it was, or could you? But I took a month off to go, that's not what this is about, which makes it so. The benefit, and correct me on this, if you find yourself in that type of situation now, there's a bit of a red flag going up, and you're able to pull out of that situation before you get back into it, right?
Oh, absolutely. And in fact, we talked about the money and me pulling. It wasn't just the money. Like you said, how you do one thing is how you do everything. And in that same time period, there was also a guest that was being pushed on me by a lot of my audience. Oh, they just loved him. He's great. Oh my gosh, you got to get him on. The moment I spoke to him on the phone, just briefly, I got, that feeling you get when you just don't like someone because you get the icky feeling, like, oh no, this guy is, I don't know what's wrong with him, but it's something about him. And I said yes, based on other people's opinions. So then I got burned because he came on to sell something at the end of the show that actually he didn't deliver on. And I got a lot of angry emails and such. And I was like, you know what? I got to listen to myself and have value that what I'm feeling and my intuition is telling me is valid. I don't need other people to validate me or what I'm feeling. And that was yet another lesson in, I have value, and what I'm, feeling or saying or what's going on is okay for me to stand on, if you know what I'm saying.
Yeah. So let's get specific then in terms of this dialogue between finance, which is clearly a big part of what you do. And then let's frame it this way of getting out of fear rather than focusing on the fear. What are some of those correlations? What are some of those connections that you notice that people often are coming into that financial conversation with?
You mean when they've gotten past the fear and now they're rolling, or when they're still stuck in that place? What do you mean?
Whichever one you think is a more interesting answer. Let's go with that.
Well, I mean, we get people coming on talking on both sides, but really, I think it's a process for everyone once you're either starting out in the business or whatever it is that, maybe fear and holding you back will play out for a while until you, like I got to a point where you're like, I've had enough of this. This is so uncomfortable that the being in the fear is more uncomfortable than moving out of it. And actually, that's just like that job I lost. It was actually, for one, I lost the income. I lost the job, which was prestige and whatever. But it was actually a blessing because that loss actually opened up for me to see that there was something greater and more potential for me to live out.
Which, I mean, think about the sort of classic interview question is, if you knew then what you know now, how would you have done that differently? But you strike me as someone who can look back, and even though, to use the professional terminology, it sucked back then, the fact that you had that experience informs you even better for what you're doing now.
It does. And in fact, everything up to my life in this present moment, in my early childhood, I studied music and I studied a number of different instruments. I did voice, and my mom's like, can you just pick one thing and be a master at it instead of being, a jack of all these things and not really a master of it. And you know what? All of those things I studied, the violin gave me discipline. The voice gave me, diaphragm, how to present myself with a mic right now. So I find that each of the things I studied now I'm able to use in my business and in my life. And the same goes with my hardships, being scared of flying, having a difficult time growing up, or, the getting fired. All of them have been things that later on I could grow from.
Which, by the way, I think Prince played all of those instruments, and we'll leave it at that. Man was awesome. And a lot of purple too, which we're using all over every website of mine, which is a whole podcast episode waiting to happen. So let's talk about fear and finance. What's a place where, there's a quote, I shared this previously on here, that Dave Ramsey, there's a quote of his that I loved, which was that investing is not a financial problem, it's an emotional problem. And there's a whole premise inside of hypnotic language patterns of what are called presuppositions. And the setup is you don't have to necessarily believe that as being true. But if you operate as if it were true, it gives you greater flexibility. And I think to myself, I think to even students of mine, that we're financially well off, and yet there was no planning for the future. And it was this kind of week to week, month to month fear. And even though they got out of debt, even though things were clearly going quite well, it was the fear that if I now stick it in the 401k, the IRA, the CD, whatever property, what if I need it? Which is, again, reiterating that premise that it's more based on the emotion. What is it that you feel and you're finding in terms of the work that you do? What's kind of that emotional trigger that has to be overcome to make any of the finance more successful?
It's interesting because now in present time, I've been working with companies on a consulting portion. So I come in and I see, okay, I'm on the AR side. So why are you not bringing the money that you should be bringing in? You have the invoicing, you have the services you're providing. What are some of the blockages stopping you from making and bringing in that money? And a lot of the times it's like that same fear base, even though they wouldn't think so, the CEOs, and, oh no, there's no fear going on here. Everything's perfect. Just fix those employees down there. Everything will be perfect. It's like, no, not really. But a lot of the times it's getting stuck and doing things the exact same way. And also that same fear that if I just change a little bit, I could lose everything. Where the essence is, if you just change things, things will run a lot smoother. One example is a business that hired me, and he was $700,000 in debt.
Oh, wow,
I was like, and so basically I said, I need to look at both sides. Can you tell me your numbers? What are your in and out? I don't know. All right, can I see your spreadsheets? No, I don't know. I had to fire her. I don't know where they're located. I'm like, how do you even know you're $700,000 in debt? I'm like, well, my lawyers told me I was. Oh, wow. I was like, okay, we need to do some serious work here. I said, we're going to need to set up, a spreadsheet of in and out, all your stuff going in, coming in, all the stuff going out, to get a clear picture of what we have to work with here, and then go from there. And he said, no, I don't do it like that. I just pay things when they come due. And I said, well, it's been nice meeting you, but I really can't help you. Unless you're willing to do something different from what you've been doing, we can't move forward. And so I think one of the biggest problems I have with meeting any company, and this was a kind of 1 or 2 person operation, is if you're a huge company or not a huge company, if you're not willing to start looking at things that are not working and making even slight, maybe minuscule changes to start, you're really not going to grow. And then realize that. And they won't realize this fear sometimes, but just to realize, let's just take a few changes. It doesn't have to be, throwing out the whole baby with the bathwater. Sometimes just a few tweaks, like what happened with my flying. You begin to realize, oh, look, this is more smooth. The water flowing better. And then you're willing to make more changes when you realize that, oh, the couple of changes you made weren't that scary.
I love that that's where you brought that. The old example of, and this is morbid, but the old Schrodinger's cat.
Yeah.
That if you don't open the box, it's going to be okay because we don't yet know. And I've had, people in my consulting programs over the years that, well, the letter comes from the IRS, but I'm terrified to open it. And here's one recently that we're on Zoom together and we're about to work on some of his messaging. We're about to work on some of the sequencing of how people come into the world of his business. And he mentions, there's a letter over here that's been sitting there for 2 weeks and I'm terrified to open it. I'm like, well, you're sitting here with someone who helps people resolve fear and anxiety. Open it now. I can't. I'm here for you. We can work on this if it's scary. And he opens it. And of course, it's like a change in privacy policy. It's boilerplate messaging and there's nothing to it. It's the, what is it? I'm in Fairfax County in Virginia. And it might be that property tax bill for my office. It might be the income tax for the county. And no, it's the reminder that they're still sending mail to the office I moved out of 2 years ago, and they're getting return mail. Like, fine. Where if we can't track it, we can't change it. And this is where I'd share, there's a funny dialogue, as much as, we're a business owner ourselves. The conversation I have with my accountant is somebody, I'm an LLC being taxed as an S Corp, I'm on payroll, and then there's quarterly draws that we end up doing beyond that, of going, this is the 4 times a year that I'm an employee, to call up, and his name's Jason too, to go, hey, boss, can I pay myself today? I want to give myself this. And we can look together and see, yes, here's what you've got. Yes, you're in the black this much. Yes, we're going to hit this criteria for the specific tax thing. But that willingness to track it and measure it. And again, just like getting over the fear of flying, of as soon as we start doing it, when you're the person who does the thing, you're the person who does the thing. This has been fantastic. And I love how you've been so specific with some of the stories. And even for people who are not dealing with accounts receivable, the ownership of this is what I'm worth, this is what I'm asking for. How can people find more from you?
Sure. They want to come listen to some of our chats and dialogues with our wonderful guests talking about business as well. It's Savvy, that is like Savvy Shopper, savvybusinessradio.com.
Outstanding. And your book too, mention that.
Yeah, it's on the same website.
Oh,
you'll see on top, resource page, and we got a number of wonderful resources out there. They're free, including you can get a copy of my book, Having It Made. And the fun thing about that is at the time, back 2006, Having It Made for me was being a VIP in a penthouse in Manhattan. And that Having It Made has simply changed now to being in wonderful Texas in a wonderful apartment with a wonderful husband. So your Having It Made can always change. Don't be stuck on, it has to look a certain way.
Nice. You'll love this. The number of people in marketing who do the sexy photos with the sports car. We recently did something where there I was with the sunglasses, giving the thumbs up, collar turned up, minivan behind me.
I love it.
Define your own success. We'll put all the links to the show notes over at jasonlinett.com/18, where you get a link to that, as well as the resources. Any final thoughts for the listeners out there?
Yes, absolutely. Like me in 2006, if you're sitting there on the edge thinking, I am not really happy with my life, I think there's more. Well, get started with something small, whatever it is. Anything out there that might be challenging that you just put on the side, go do it today.
You have been listening to the Hypnotic Language Hacks podcast with Jason Linett. Please stop everything and start exploring jasonlinett.com. for even more business influence and persuasion resources. Make it a priority right now to subscribe to this program and listen to every episode, because the next one may reveal that one hypnotic influence secret to massively scale your success. Change your words, change your business, change your life. Get even more at jasonlinett.com.